Call this work session of the Assembly to order. We're here to discuss revitalization legislation. We have two different versions before us, and S version of the other version, so one of them. We go around the room and take attendance, please. Mr. Hall, please start.
Ernie Hall, Anchorage Assembly. Bill Evans, Anchorage Assembly.
Jennifer Johnston.
Tim Steele, Assembly.
Dick Trainee, Assembly.
Naomi Green-Johnson.
Patrick Foote.
Pete Peterson, Assembly.
Lisa Mahoney, CFO. DNSW Municipal Attorney.
Brian Robbins, Assessor.
Jerry Lieber, Community Development.
Thank you very much. Ms. Mahoney, I understand you have a presentation for us.
Right. So on June 6th, we provided a work session about the impact to the Fairview area in regard to DOT. They all came in and discussed their concerns. But additionally, at that work session, what we did, if you recall, is we said that the administration has an alternative solution. So we have outlined some of the details or at a high level of that. And so today what we plan to do is go through our ordinance in more detail and also provide suggestion for a different recommendation that we had talked about in June. So what I want to do first is say what the recommendation summary is, get to the point immediately, and then talk about the provisions that we're recommending for the housing solution for Anchorage. As a result of looking at this, we recognize that the deteriorated property code overall has tweaks that should be made to it. And that is regardless of what we do in Fairview. So we made those suggestions in the ordinance that we submitted. Also, so I was going to review those with you. We had talked last time about the negative impact that the Fairview ordinance had to the tax cap, meaning that no new revenues would be realized based on the way the current tax cap was written. We have made suggested changes to that would enable us to put that property in the cap and increase the taxes. And then also, we have carefully reviewed the Fairview ordinance, and we have suggestions to clarify and strengthen portions of that ordinance. So with that, moving on to slide 3, because Patrick told me I needed to be fast, so I'm going to talk really fast. So if you have questions and you want me to slow down, you just say slow down. I will. So one thing that I want to point out, this is the deteriorated property ordinance that is currently in our code. The framework and the foundation for this is Alaska statutes. What you see on this page should not be changed unless it's changed at the statute level. The one thing that I wanted to point out that is really important, and that is that the definition of property that is eligible for deteriorated property needs to meet one of the 3 criteria that is listed below. Just one. And so the reason why this is important, okay, so let me just review them quickly. In the last 5 years, it had some environmental contamination on it. It has a building that is older than 15 years old, or it's designated as a deteriorated zone. So the Fairview ordinance is focusing on number 3. They are wanting to designate the whole area as deteriorated. But what is really important to note, and this is an interpretation that Julia pointed out to a developer who has talked to me about another deteriorated zone, and that is that developers don't have to request area to be deteriorated in order to get this exemption. They can just come in with an individual structure that is older than 15 years old and apply for the exemption. So you don't have to designate a zone. So any building around town that's 15 years or older, or any land that is environmentally contaminated, is eligible. So it's really important because we have not interpreted the code this way in the past. So this is thanks to Julia. I'm thinking of that. So anyways, what that means though is any building in Fairview that is even 1 year old, and if they rehab, if they renovate it, they are eligible.
Mr. Trainee has a question.
Since I probably know the developer that you talked to, thank you very much for talking to me.
Yeah, we did. I just have to circle back with them, which is on my to-do list. What we are suggesting is that what we do as a governance and policy group is that we implement the best of both of the ordinances that have been presented to you all. And what we mean by that is, we submitted some code for addressing the housing shortage in Anchorage. And we think that there is, well, actually, no, we all know there's a serious housing situation in Anchorage, and it's not just in Fairview. So our attempt was to address it citywide. We still have a few edits that we need to make, and actually, I think that if we decide if you all decide as an organization to move forward with such a code like that, you know, it should go for review to that housing committee. There's a group of people in the city that are working on housing, and have them look at it and provide edits and comments. But also, we really do support the goal of revitalizing Fairview, and so we would recommend that that we adopt certain provisions of the Fairview ordinance after certain clarifications are made. So we're suggesting a combination of both to meet housing on a citywide basis as well as components in Fairview. So I want to go through them.
I just want to recommend Mr. Boston's strengths. That's all.
All right. So, moving on. So what we were trying to do with our housing solution, as I indicated, was to designate the city to be eligible for housing. And this was an attempt to address the housing situation at all income levels, from homelessness to low income to moderate income to middle class, because that's where the problems exist. But what we wanted to do was provide some additional incentives to address the low to moderate income problem. Because I think that if we don't put those incentives out there, it may be that our developers won't build in that manner. Also, we, of course, want to be sure that the benefit and the tax abatement is commensurate with the benefit. We are recommending the standardization of the abatement amount just to create fairness and equity amongst our builders. And then also, because this is such an overreaching code that addresses housing, we really wanted to define some really key critical terms such as mixed use, affordable, and what does housing really mean. So what I've done here is just summarize what these key definitions are. And I'm not going to go through and read these to you because they are already in the ordinance, but these are the ones that I think are more important to understand. The first one is the standardization of the amount of the taxes that would be forgiven. And we believe we should, from the housing component, is we should standardize that. The next three bullets, affordable housing, low-income household, and moderate income. These, bless you. These are criteria that have already been determined and defined by HUD. And what it does in the code is just documents the eligibility requirements to receive additional tax incentives to provide affordable housing. The next one is just to document what rental housing really means, because there are some organizations, and trust me, we deal with this in terms of the bed tax, that may try to get around the definition of what is residential. So we want to specifically exclude bed and breakfasts and hotels from getting a housing incentive. Rehabilitation, here what we're doing is expanding the definition to allow residential units to, for example, add on to a currently developed property and then be eligible for the housing abatement. Also, we included mixed-use property in the definition of this housing for tax abatement, but what we wanted to ensure was that the housing component is the focus. Therefore, we established a minimum square footage of the building. So, for example, someone could build anywhere in the city a housing complex with a Starbucks and a clothing store downstairs if they'd like, and then housing units on top. I mean, that is the best way to develop housing in smaller communities.
Just a quick question, and this same definition for using Title 21, is our code?
There's no direct correlation, but really what it should say is mixed-use development that it would correlate.
Yeah, just
Mixed use
hate that
development.
conflict in the code is
Okay,
different.
we'll make that edit. And then lastly would be the permanent residency housing. I mean, we just wanted again to make sure that if we're going to forgive all of these taxes for housing incentives, that we're forgiving it for the right reason, and that is for permanent housing versus hoteling. So we, very clearly defined that definition. And I just can't reiterate enough, I mean, we're looking at forgiving millions and millions of dollars in taxes. So to do this, we really should have good, strong definitions so that we can implement this fairly and equitably and with as much clarity as possible, which is the reason why we really believe we need to have these definitions. These definitions are also in the Tacoma Code, which is what we used as a framework. We of course, modified them to fit the acreage market. So moving on to a little more discussion on the affordable housing component of it. What we are proposing is that all deteriorated housing redevelopment receive a 3-year tax abatement. And this means that it doesn't need to be eligible for any type of low income or affordable housing. This just means anything. And then what this would do is this would address the middle class and the need for folks to move up in regard to their housing situations. And then we created more incentives for developers if they could address the low income component. So if they could designate 10% of their units as low income, then we would address going up to 10 years of tax forgiveness. If they designate 10% as moderate, then again, we could look at 10 years of tax abatement, but then we wouldn't want to combine it to make it 20 because obviously that's in conflict with the state statute. So the combination cannot exceed 10 years. Moving on, the next page identifies some more provisions that we documented here. What we're indicating is that if you modify an add-on, that you would be eligible. Also, because there is the potential, again, for forgiving millions of dollars of taxes, we would want some transparency and some accountability with our developers. We would want them to provide affidavits indicating, the number of existing and planned units that they plan to build, and also if they're justifying a rehabilitation based on code deficiencies. If you recall, that was in the definition on the earlier page. We would want them to document those and indicate that justification is verified by the municipality. We are recommending that there is no need for the financial need test that currently exists in the code. That would be completely eliminated from the housing component, and so that should make it much easier for developers to qualify to get these incentives. However, it takes a while for us to review all this. It takes a lot of internal resources. So when you look at the cost payer, cost causer concept, we are suggesting that there be an application fee that is provided by the developer, $500,000 for residential mixed use and $1,000 for commercial. Currently, we do this. We did this for the most recent one for Marlowe. We estimated it probably took over 200 hours to do all of the research and analysis and the back and forth in terms of ensuring that the application is complete. Also, a best practice from Tacoma was Tacoma actually established a contract with the developer to ensure that the terms of the abatement, the forgiveness of the taxes were really clearly understood and documented. And we believe that that's a good practice to implement here so that we can be assured that there's no misunderstandings. Also, we would like for the developer to provide an annual report that states that he's kept up with his agreement. He actually has the occupancy, he is in compliance, and if he receives an abatement for some of the low to moderate income, we want him to certify on an annual basis that he is still doing that. I had mentioned that as we looked at this, we looked at the entire deteriorated property language. So what we've done also in our ordinance is we have suggested that we strengthen the language associated with tax deferral. If you recall, right now, there are 5 years allowed for potential tax deferrals for developers, but we don't really have any, we don't have enough detail behind that if they don't comply. So what we want to do is strengthen that language and add a bit of language associated with low-income housing and low-income tax credits if they're involved. Also, if a developer doesn't report timely, based on what I had said earlier, or if they report falsely, we would terminate the deferral or the exemption. And this is really all about making our developers accountable. If we're going to forgive all this tax, we should make them accountable and hold them to their word. And so this just creates penalties associated with that. And I believe this is in the public interest. And then lastly, this would be new language to provide transparency to the public in regard to the amount of abatements that we would be giving out every single year. So what the finance department would do is on an annual basis, they would report to the assembly the number of properties and the addresses, the use, the units, the expiration dates, and the amount of taxes that are deferred. And really, it's forgiven for the developer, but shifted to everybody else. And that's what's really important to understand. And then when the exemption expires.
Ms. Johnson has a question.
Are you strengthening the language as far as the property transfer, or are you suggesting that we include property transfer?
We're strengthening that language as well,
So that,
so that we don't have to incorporate it in every contract. It'll be a part of the code.
and is the municipality looking at allowing property transfers during the abatement period?
Well, they're already allowed in sort of the low-income situation, I believe, if it's necessary to continue with the low-income housing financing.
If you recall in the Mark Marlowe deal that we just did,
Right.
we said that if he sells it as condos, tax abatement, for example, doesn't transfer.
Right.
And
Right.
so, that would be an example. If they're in a deferral period and
They remain a
they,
low-income housing.
there's so many different scenarios in terms of things that they could do. We just want to put some teeth around being able to recapture some of that tax.
Okay, thank you.
So we had pointed out at the last work session, the way that the current code is written, if we exempt all of these properties, it is essentially lost taxes, that you can't increase the tax cap. And so we had said we would come up with a new definition that would do that. And so that definition is represented here, and it was incorporated in our ordinance. And we, after some thought, we had talked that what we would do is we would put the tax, the new construction in the tax cap at the point in time that the deferral expired, but I believe that that's the wrong thing to do. I think that we should put it in at the point in time, earlier, at the point in time that the property is actually placed in service. This would increase the tax cap sooner. The reason for that is because this is the point in time when the services for the city are actually rendered. And so, for example, let's assume that we have a significant housing development. There may be children that are in this housing development. We would want to be able to capture that portion for the school district so that that funding can go to the school district, because otherwise it's completely lost. What this does is it enables that to happen. However, what it does, it's a complete shifting of that burden. So the developers who are building these concepts, their taxes will be forgiven, and everybody else in the city will be picking up their share. So we believe this will address that. So moving on, in regard to our recommendations associated with adopting portions of the Fairview ordinance, we believe that it's a good ordinance if some modifications and clarifications are made. The first one, we had a lot of debate. Now our little group is 6 of us talking about this particular situation. We cannot discern from the code as it's written today how scenarios would work relative to the current code versus properties that are designated in Fairview. And so I thought the best way to communicate this would be through an example. So let's assume that a developer incurs $500,000 in infrastructure costs, replatting, whatever. And he also constructs, or she, a building assessed at $10 million, and this would be the new value. And so this would result in $150,000 a year of taxes. And for 10 years, that would be up to 10-year abatement. That would be $1.5 million total abatement. So, under the Fairview Code, we cannot discern, and maybe we just need clarification, and I think this is an opportunity to just update the code to really clearly depict this. Is the abatement 500,000 up to a maximum of 1.5, or is it 1.5? Or could the developer not apply under the Fairview Code and apply for an abatement under the municipal code, and then show a financial need, and then get the full 1.5. So we really need that to be clarified, because we cannot discern what it means. So if that could be strengthened, that would be really helpful.
Just to speak to that, the intent was that they're going to use the presumptive deteriorated ordinance, then the infrastructure piece is all they can abate. If they want to go for a larger abatement, they need to go through the traditional process.
Okay, and that is excellent news, because that was the foundation for what we recommend and what at least administration supports going forward. So it would be just the 500,000, not the 1.5. Okay, that's good. Then, secondly, so could you write some clarifying code on that? Because
No,
it's
I guess
really.
I just to elaborate a little bit on my understanding, so that it could, so I would be going in the right direction. As Chair Flynn said, for the Fairview, and in particular, that if they were going under the presumptive, then it's limited in two ways. One, it's limited by those costs associated directly, those actual costs that are spelled out. So that's the first limitation, for remediation, whatever those things are. And then secondly, it's limited to the delta. So you're never shifting, as you've said, the cost to anybody else of what the taxpayer has been paying all along in the on the assessed value of what it is. And so the incentive works to be that in order to, what the disincentive, as I understood it, was that for a developer to enhance a property, then it's assessed at the enhanced value, and then they pay additional tax. And so what Mr. Marlowe did on, which is essentially what Mr. Marlowe was able to do on McKinley Towers, was he got the full benefit of an abatement without having to pay any minimal amount, because that's how concerned the city was about getting rid of that. But when he came back for the Renaissance, which has just been re-upped, and in this project, it's limited to an abatement of the value that has been increased by the enhancement. And
Julia,
so
we totally understand.
Okay, so that's
but
the
it just-
second.
We get that, but that does, just so you know, that does create a tax shifting, and I will sit down and show you the financial model where you can see that.
I guess I'm saying it's not the same tax shifting as, for instance, the senior exemption, because it's limited and somebody's paying the same value. So if they never, the idea was that if they never, that the city wouldn't be getting that money, but for the enhancement to the property. And that was the basis for that, for
Right.
what happened
Mr.
before.
Evans
But we
wants to
went
jump in
through
here.
that.
Can you give him a second?
I just, On your scenario, we're saying there will be the tax shifting. Is that only if the property is included in the tax cap as you proposed?
Right.
But if it's not included in the tax cap, there wouldn't be the tax shifting.
Okay, if it's not included in the tax cap,
The enhancement.
the enhancement, there is no increase to property taxes, and the cost of services are completely absorbed.
Right.
There is no revenue increase ever,
Right.
ever,
Gotcha.
because it never gets into the cap.
Mr. Bosky wants to follow up on that, I think.
I do. So I'm a little confused because I made my little notes when you were talking feverishly about what we were just talking about. Is it really an accurate statement to say there's never, ever, ever an increase if, in fact, we don't enter it until after the abatement period's over? Why don't we just do that?
Because the code currently doesn't allow it.
Why can't we change the code to
Well,
allow?
that's what we're suggesting.
Yeah. Well,
So
that's
if we
why
change the-
I'm
If we change the code,
confused.
we will allow it. And
Okay,
we're suggesting
please
that we do.
clarify for me, because now you've, I think, lost me. I understood it the first time you talked to say that even though we're not collecting revenue, we're still going to basically enter it in the tax cap at the time it becomes in service. And when you say in service, you don't mean somebody's finished their renovations and they're using it. You mean in service, meaning the time of the end of the abatement?
No, in service at the point in time that people move in, when they receive a certificate of occupancy.
Okay, so I think I'm understanding something totally different. Am I the only one that's lost? When are you suggesting it enters the tax cap?
When they receive the certificate of occupancy.
So my question is, that's the moment you're saying it's being shifted to other property tax owners. So why could the argument not be made? Why don't we just wait until the abatement period's over?
You could, but if you did that, then the costs associated with providing services like the school example that I gave you would be absorbed entirely by other taxpayers in that the tax cap doesn't go up. Because if you don't put the new construction in the cap, you can't increase property taxes.
Oh, I get that.
Okay.
Yeah, I get that. I think we're just looking at it differently. But it's something that I'm still open to, so.
Mr. Evans, have one more question on that?
No, I don't think, I guess just to clarify myself, but and I think it's what Ms. Dombowski was saying, is the point, we can decide at whatever point we want to enter the property into the tax cap. It could be at occupancy, it could be at the end of the abatement period, the end of the deferral period, correct?
Right.
And each one of those would have a different impact either on the cost of absorbed services or shared costs. So I guess that I just want to see, if we entered the property and to the tax cap at the end of the complete process, the end of the deferral period, for the period of time from occupancy until that period of time, the cost of services that this property has somehow generated would be absorbed citywide. There would be no increase.
Right.
But at the time that we entered into the tax cap at the end of the deferral period, then the property owner would be paying whatever the full amount is on that property.
Right, but the tax cap wouldn't go up at that point, because at that point, you just have more taxpayers paying taxes, okay? Because you just have another person that's paying an amount of your revenue requirement, but it never got into increasing the tax cap.
I think we're sort of confusing ourselves here.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Evans is correct.
I showed you guys an example
Yeah.
last time, do
Yeah,
you remember?
Mr. Evans is correct. We have the choice, if we choose to change the code, to either enter a rehabilitated property into the tax cap calculation upon occupancy, inclusion of abatement, or the inclusion of the deferral. As the code is written now, we don't have, it doesn't go in ever. Does that solve what is that why your hand went up, Mr. Bosky, or you have something else?
I just had a smart comment, so I'll pass.
We like smart comments.
You gave me time to reflect on my statement.
Okay. Please proceed, Ms. Melody.
Okay. The next question, and maybe somebody in here knows the answer to this, but as we were thinking through the tax abatement, we were just curious if anyone thought that this would constitute a contribution of municipal funds, which would trigger a requirement for developers to hire and pay the Davis-Bacon wages.
You spent too much time on this, Ms. Melody.
But no,
It's an important.
I think it's an
It's a
interesting.
really important
yeah.
issue,
I mean, I can see.
because we don't want to increase the
Yeah.
cost of private development.
Yeah. I didn't
It's
see that.
really
I think
important
that'd
to
be
think
good.
about. The other thing, okay, and I know I'm running out
How
of
is,
time.
can I ask a question on that? There must be other examples of this in other communities, so we would know if it triggers it or not.
And we just thought of it this morning.
Okay.
I mean, to me, it's an example of there's a lot of complexity, we kind of can't think of everything all at once, and,
I'm pretty sure it doesn't nationwide.
okay,
But-
I mean, that's good to know, but we just need to maybe have some affirmative information on it. Also, in regard to, I mean, we viewed the Fairview ordinance as providing a carte blanche, if you will, public benefit. And so we were just concerned that some businesses, we might not want to be eligible for tax abatements. And we just listed a few of them. If the marijuana initiative passes, you know, what a great place to put a store, because it would get 10 years of tax abatement and 5 years of deferral. I don't think anybody in this room wants that. We would just suggest that we put some sort of clarifying language and maybe address this somehow. And one of the ways that we thought it could be addressed was through the next page, which was this discretionary act language. I thought that we could address it this way, meaning that we could just say we have the discretion to exclude these types of businesses from getting the abatement. But Dennis is saying no. He told me no, so. I mean, I was trying to
Why not?
come up with a solution, okay?
So, I think,
Welcome, Mr. Wheeler.
thank you. I understand the
You
question.
guys have a lot of fun up there, I can tell.
Yeah. This was an equal protection question, yes?
Right.
Right, so to the extent that you target certain businesses or exclude certain businesses or other types of development, the question is, on what basis can you do that fairly? And our concern is you can't single out a certain kind of operation and say that's not eligible.
Would it be cleaner to say if a business requires a conditional use permit, it is not eligible under this provision of code?
No, because you could have a mixed
I'll
use.
I'll leave it as a thought.
Yeah.
Mr. Boston.
I have a second thought. Could you say that only businesses that are compliant with city, state, and federal law would qualify? That's not discretionary. I mean, that's just
They
saying,
all qualify.
not federal law.
A liquor store,
No, I'm thinking of a marijuana shop. Would
okay, we
Would
can
they-
take that out, but the rest are still in.
Good point, touche.
All right.
See, I'm not the smartest one in the room.
On this issue, I don't think there's one singular person. It's too complicated.
Oh, boy.
It's too complicated.
Keep on rolling, please.
Okay, so that's something that we need to think about going forward. We have more suggestions to make this good. As I mentioned earlier, if we eliminate the housing references and in the current Fairview code and follow the administration's code, we think that would work really well. As we had talked before, I mean, we think that it should be a smaller area that's designated. You know, we had talked about, you know, the interface and the overlap with the DOT projects. I provided the statistics here. It's 239,486 parcels. I mean, we really would support a smaller experimental area, 206 parcels with half of the assessed value. This way, we could really test, you know, how much of this would really be embraced by our developer community. We also believe that if we go down this path of reimbursing for the infrastructure costs, I just really anticipate a lot of conflict in terms of working with developers on what really constitutes infrastructure. So we would like to have some words like other costs removed because it's too vague. And we'd like to expand this section, and this is all about just equity and fairness to specifically identify what is meant by infrastructure. And for example, does infrastructure mean paving of adjacent alleys, street improvements such as storm drain connections? Does that include subsurface and connections, curbing gutters, subsurface work, blah, blah? I can go on and on, but there's a list that we could look at and incorporate in the ordinance so that it's really clear. And that way, you know, the administration isn't in disputes with the developers as to what these actual costs are. We do not support the environmental remediation costs being eligible. And the reason for that is that from an assessed value perspective, we already reduce the value of this land. More often than not, it is a liability that was caused by a private developer. And so to shift the costs from that from a private landowner, I'm sorry, not a developer. But to shift those costs to other taxpayers due to negligence caused by a singular taxpayer, we just don't think that that's fair and equitable. Also, the liabilities associated with this could be really large. And then lastly, in regard to the infrastructure type costs, we think that if we could just strengthen the out-of-pocket language to say that it needs to reflect reasonable and market cost, that way we can prevent builders from hiring their brother to do a cost at triple the cost to get it back, you know, to get a tax abatement. You know, we think internally, do you want me to start?
Oh, no, I just.
Okay. We think internally we could find folks in-house to test for reasonable and fair. You know, we can go to Public Works, we can go to AWU, so we can go all over to find that expertise. Except for, we don't have it for environmental, and we don't have anybody in-house that can evaluate those costs. So if you decide that you want to keep that language in, just be aware that is something we would have to contract out. And so we'd have to probably hire an engineering firm to evaluate those costs to make sure that they're reasonable.
Just back to the, as far as reflecting reasonable market costs of infrastructure, we do have assessment from our utilities, so we could use that, right, like and then could we use as far as for our roads and our clusters or whatever, using like an RID? Could we go to that
Well, I don't think
language?
this would be an RAD.
No, but
This would
for
be
that kind of, you know, that's an assessed value that is placed on properties for improvement, similar to what we're looking at here. I just was wondering if that's.
You're speaking to the administrative piece of this.
Right.
What she's asking for is a language that allows them to use that administrative
Right,
process.
but I understand, I would hate to have, I don't care who the developer is or contractor is, you know, just bringing in their receipts and saying, this is how much it costs us. We've got to come up with something that's across the board and is fair to everyone. I'm just.
My
Well,
brother
we-
built my place for below market rates.
We
but
talked to,
anyway.
you know.
Well, and with AWWU, developers do infrastructure lots of times a lot less expensively than AWU does, but at least that gives us something across the board. Or, you know, we have private-public partnerships throughout the city where there's been grant money, same thing. But I'm just saying, we need to have
Right, I mean,
we'll work on this language.
We talked with AWWU about this because we didn't want to circumvent any of the procedures that they currently have in place.
Right.
For example, if you have an 8-inch line and you want to make it a 15, you have to make it a 15-inch water line to accommodate, you know, 100 more people in your building. I mean, AWU currently would have to evaluate the plans and the materials and do all their engineering review up front, and that is the way the current processes work today, and we would not want that to change. At that point in time, they would be able to see the plan, so they would be a part of the process up front. Then when the invoices come in after the fact, then they would be able to evaluate those invoices to the plan. And I mean, I think that would work.
That and then I'm just looking at the other part of the infrastructure, which is your roads, your sidewalks, and that we might have a similar situation with our RIDs or something like that to assess that value for that tax abatement.
That's what you guys have.
Well, I'm going to go back and to page 10, and it's not a question necessarily, it's just, I guess clarification. But when you read page 10, I think you did a really good job explaining it, but I look at this in this way. Okay, so we're going to lose property tax collection for 10 years. In order to provide a financial balance in terms of the tax cap, this deteriorated property that we're not going to be collecting taxes on is going to be included in the line item in the tax cap calculation called new construction. Is that correct? That's how I'm reading this.
Could you
I hope
say
that I was
question?
clear.
Can you say that again?
Okay. So, we're gonna lose, property tax collection for 10 years, okay?
Based on the current,
Right, okay. So, and we talked about the tax cap situation at the last meeting, we're talking a little bit about it now. So, in order to provide a financial balance, if you will, in terms of the tax cap and how much money we can collect, okay? We're going to now add this deteriorated property value and the line item tax cap under new construction.
Yep.
Okay.
that's what
Then
this
I'm-
is suggesting.
Yeah, and I think that's a great idea. I really do, and I just want to make sure that I was reading it correctly, but I think it's great.
Yeah, and we're
Thank you.
suggesting that we do it the point time it's placed in service versus 15 years on the road.
Perfect, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Please continue, Ms. Bell.
Okay, let's see where we're going.
You were on your potential financial impact of tax
Okay,
exemptions.
yes, okay, last thing. Not last, but this just gives examples of some of the financial implications of this. And so we just all, you all just approved the Renaissance project. That was $23 million, if you look to the second column, of exempt taxes. And that equated to $3.3 million in tax forgiveness for Mr. Marlowe. That shifted to others. Actually, right now, this is just lost forever because we don't have a new definition in place. So this is lost in the $1.8 million in deferral. To put another point of comparison, the McKinley Tower, that was $13 million, and that was $1 million in taxes that has been lost, and that was a 5-year tax abatement. So if you roll forward, and if we can incentivize new housing of $100 million with $95 million of additional tax or additional assessed value exempt,
Then we hit a home run.
it would be awesome. I mean, it would be excellent if we can be a part of the solution. That's our goal. Then the amount of tax to be forgiven would be 14 million, 7 million deferred. If it's 50 million for commercial, it would be 7 million and 3.6. And this assumes the maximum. And so it's just provided for a point of reference so that you can understand the impact. So lastly, in closing, I just wanted to say that, we're really hopeful that we can come to some collaborative approach between the Fairview revitalization and addressing housing on a citywide basis. But to open up the door for the commercial perspective, but now that I have a better understanding of the 500, this isn't as big of a deal. It is really precedent setting. But if it's just that 500, I'm not as concerned about it. So I don't know. That's it.
Thank you, Lucinda. I invited Mr. Pollack and Mr. Pop here because they've reviewed this and want to get this perspective from them. Before we ask them to come forward, does anybody have any more questions for Lucinda? Okay. Mr. Pop and Mr. Pollack, would you join us, please? Sure. You say there, Jerry. There's 2 more chairs over there. Okay. And Mr. Pop, I believe you have another appointment, so would you care to go first?
Sure. I've just got some brief comments because.
There's a lever on the bottom. The lever on the right.
I feel your pain.
There's a lever on these. So as I sit here at the big table, first of all, Bill Pop, I'm President and CEO of the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, and we've been observing this proposal and now sets of proposals, And where we're not quite ready yet to comment on specific ordinances, we do commend this process because it is definitely needed. We've got a situation where we're seeing what we believe anecdotally is some fairly significant impacts to the local economy, which seems a little odd when we're facing 4.2, 4.4% unemployment later this summer. That we don't, that it would be an impact, but the challenge that we're finding is that we're hearing from businesses in our surveys and in our work with them that they're finding it more and more difficult to attract employees based on the issue of a lack of available and affordable housing. And that is a pretty significant issue. And then another trend that we're starting to notice, it's anecdotal, we don't have good statistical data on this, but we're starting to get a sense that job growth in Anchorage is being constrained by a lack of available bodies significantly, where we could have substantially more job growth going on in the private sector based on the number of positions that we're aware of that are being listed on a given day, but a lack of available people to fill those jobs. Because it is becoming increasingly more expensive to live in Anchorage. We are the 23rd most expensive city in the United States, according to the Cost of Living Index. We're just out on the street literally today doing the new quarterly survey. We're the 20th most expensive housing market, and that's an aggregated metric of both rental and single-family homes. So we look around the country, we talk with our brethren in the economic development world, and what you're doing today is the first step towards what many other communities do across the United States. Tacoma did quite a bit of work on that several years ago in terms of reestablishing downtown Tacoma as an attractive place to live in. There are any number of other cities that have faced similar situations that you are facing here today. Incentivization is going to be very important. What that incentivization looks like, whether it's monetary or regulatory, I think is a very important question. Exploring longer-term solutions in terms of issues related to, example, tax incremental financing, which seems to be the boogeyman legislatively. Nobody wants to touch it because they're not sure if it's constitutional or not. I've got a legal opinion that says that it isn't, and so we'd have to get a constitutional amendment. But I've got other legislators who say, or other lawyers who say, if you test it, maybe it passes the smell test in the Supreme Court. So, sooner or later, somebody's going to have to pull the trigger on that and figure out whether or not TIFs can actually be implemented, because then that's a huge tool that any number of cities across the United States have taken on and have used very successfully to leverage the financial capacity of the private sector to expand public infrastructure. And everybody wins, because you get an increase in the tax base and you use the other guy's dime basically to finance the project at a much cheaper rate with a corresponding tax abatement to cover the payment. It's an important process that you're going through here today. One thing that I would note is that the discussion today is centered around multifamily rental, if I'm understanding the way this is being proposed. That's only about 40% of the problem in terms of the next 20 years worth of growth, according to the Anchorage Housing Study. So you've still got multifamily single, owner properties as well as single-family homes, which will account for at least a third of housing demand in the next decade when you're trying to deal with 21,000 units of housing over the next 20 years. We're growing at about 1% a year right now. That's our current projection, and that's what we're looking at going forward. And it's mostly through local fruitfulness. We're birthing a lot of babies, not bringing a lot of people into town. That, if you think about it, also creates more problems for the job market, because babies aren't effective workers until, well, it depends on your perspective on teenagers, but
Careful.
Kids aren't effective workers until they've gone through a couple of decades worth of work, so of development. So that's not a solution. We are going to have to figure out how we're going to get more bodies in town to deal with the job growth that we're going to see over the next decade or more, especially if any of these projects that are being proposed move forward.
Mr. Johnson had a question.
I just, a thought has occurred to me as everybody, you, chamber, everybody's on this housing bandwagon, and it's for all the right reasons. But in looking at it, does anybody look at the cost and the results of the 2008 crash? Because even though here in Anchorage we didn't have the crash, the economic crash we had elsewhere, I know many builders went under because their letter of credit, banking, we had a banking problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that banking problem is just barely coming, I mean, it still is anybody looking at that aspect? Because before we fix a lot of code to address the situation that maybe has just as much of some outside,
Dodd-Frank is a real challenge.
yeah,
And that's a federal issue.
right,
I've had discussions with the various offices of the federal delegation mentioning the fact that what I'm hearing is it's more about regulatory issues rather than a willingness to deploy. There's plenty of willingness to deploy because there's a hell of a lot of capital sitting in Alaska banks.
yes.
But under the constraints that they're currently operating under, they're having a hard time deploying. That's going to be, we all know how very effective Congress is right now in getting any legislation through. And so until that situation resolves itself, it almost feels like a fool's errand to chase that in.
My concern is if we're trying to fix something and we're not the largest problem, that our fix doesn't do what we're intending it to do as much.
Project economics has a lot to do with it too.
Yeah,
So affecting project economics is something that the municipality can have an effect on.
Right, but I don't
Cost
wanna-
of time, it's not, you guys aren't the only center of issues related to this, and I would never want to say that or give that impression.
No, I kind of would love to know what percentage, or, where do we sit? If you've got a line from here to here, and this is your problem, and we're, Title 21 is this much of it. What we can do to incentivize is this much, and this much is out of our control. So we can at least get a global look at what we're doing, so we don't go overboard we're government and we're here to help.
Happy to bring our friends in the banking and development industry to the table if there's a desire to have that conversation on that part of it.
Jennifer, one thing I'll add is the Housing Anchorage recognizes that the banking issue is one, and one of its subsets is a lender banking focus group that's meeting regularly to address those kind of local issues, and there are things that the local banks, even with national roots like Wells Fargo, what can they do and what can they not do to assist? So it's part of the problem, no doubt.
I think it would be worthwhile that we all have a touch of that.
And Mr. Falk, do you have any other comments you wanted to share?
Well, just short comments, really. Bill has said it really eloquently. I think my comments are, this group in Fairview in particular are a motivated group that's been trying to get something done for 2.5 years, and they've stayed with it. I think with a lot of transparency, they have committed to finding the answers, including stakeholders, having good discussions, across a broad deal. I'm very supportive of your ordinance. The administration brings great comments as far as some of the devils in the detail stuff, and I think you have more work to do on that. But I'm very supportive because it's just a proactive way to address two real significant problems that we have right now. One of them is an aging infrastructure in some parts of town. We have stuff that we still have wood stave pipes in some parts of our town. And the housing gridlock. Housing Anchorage, of which I've been attending with Sue Lukens, is not focused on affordability as its primary thing. It's basically because there's no place for anybody to go. It's all kind of stove up. If you want to leave a moderate income kind of situation, go to somewhere else, there's no place to go. It's all it all needs to move a little bit together in the beginning. On the infrastructure, I think in some ways I believe that the municipality's role is to provide the infrastructure. And so when you ask developers in general to pay for their project costs and offsite infrastructure, it basically makes that not feasible in many situations. I kind of see the concept as a financing vehicle, that the municipality should be improving and providing infrastructure, and the developer is willing to do it, and in effect he puts out the money, or she puts out the money and makes the development and gets that money back through a tax abatement. It's really a way that the municipality is financing those improvements, really at zero interest rate. It's better than a bond rate. So to me, it seems like a pretty attractive option. Once again, the devil's in the details, make sure it's done properly. The second challenge is the housing shortage, and developers act in their own interest, and it's curious that if you talk to someone who's trying to rent an apartment today, they'll tell you that it's very expensive. If you want a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, you're going to pay probably $1,000 to $1,500 a month for a rental in a reasonable part of town. To me, that seems high, and I think to some of our workforce it seems high. So what we're trying to do is I think a necessary incentive. Does this incentive on housing, whether it's just this project or citywide, is it enough to make it tip the scale in favor of some development? I think it helps. I don't think there's one silver bullet. I don't think this is going to make the final decision that all of a sudden we're going to have this sprouting of housing. I just don't think that's going to happen in that way. But it's one of the things that can happen, and I think it's necessary to happen. I guess my final comment is, if you're going to create an incentive environment, I believe incentives work, then you want to have it be enough of an incentive so that people act on it. If it's a small incentive, it becomes kind of a sideline discussion as opposed to a motivating factor. I guess that's what I would say. So.
Ms. Johnston has a follow-up on that. Darn it.
I love it. My challenge to all of your groups as you go forward on this is we have a comprehensive plan that our new Title 21 has been based on. And the comprehensive plan is 15 years old? I can't remember. And I would really like you to take a look at our comprehensive plan. God help us going down that road again, but we're past due. But I even know, sitting in Title I committee meetings, that we were dealing with a comprehensive plan that was way outdated. So if your groups can look at that comprehensive plan and see where it is limiting progressive and sustainable growth, whereas it was trying to, when it was being drafted, it was taking care of maybe our not so not the best of developers or developments, and we were fixing a problem that the market probably has gone beyond at this point. So anyways, that would be my challenge to each of you.
Anything else? Is there any final words?
Just one last follow-up that I would like to touch on. Housing is a very important issue, but I would also offer that there is some need for redevelopment in support of commercial development. It's referenced through the Fairview aspect of the legislation being talked about today, but I think we've got a broader issue growing in terms of promoting some redevelopment, dealing with some of the sins of the 70s and 80s, and starting to make available similar incentives that will help to deal with some of that redevelopment that we want on the commercial side of things. I bring this up only because we're getting a fair number of businesses coming through town right now looking us over, and they're not finding a lot that will work for them. It's getting challenging. And I'm not talking retail. I mean, retail will do what retail needs to do. But it's more on non-retail related businesses within the bounds that I'm able to talk about.
Okay, fair enough. Mr. Traney, do you have something?
There is a big hotel in Midtown on Northern Lights. I'd love to see you guys take it down.
If I had the power of eminent domain, that...
it makes the McKay building sound like a good term.
I understand.
And Fourth Avenue Theater.
Huh?
And the Fourth Avenue.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and wrap this up, because I know we need a couple minutes to get ready for the next one. Anything else? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.